Ladies and gentlemen, this is David Mirikitani with another episode of Weighing In, brought to you by USA Wrestling, the national governing body for wrestling in the United States, and by Nike Wrestling. Go to athleteps.com for all of your Nike and USA Wrestling branded gear. Joined, as usual, by Mark Ostrander and Grant Turner. We say this from time to time. It's important to say this today. The opinions expressed on this show are the opinions of Mark, Grant, and David, respectively, and not those of USA Wrestling, because I think it's going to get a little heated today. First of all, good morning, guys. How are you?
Good morning, I'd love to say good, but I'm not going to. Grant, how are you doing?
I'm excited for the day.
Yeah,
it's a new one. So here we go.
So we got a bunch of subjects. We have to finish our 285 rankings. We have to do our team rankings based on that. And Mark and GT and I submitted those, and I did all the math, so we can get to that. But the subject of the day, for sure, is the vote on the Iowa athletes, Iowa and Iowa State wrestlers. I'm not going to bore everybody with the reading of the ruling. Essentially, they came out with the ruling and said, we're recording this on November 9th, 10 a.m. Central Time. On November 8th in the evening, they came out that said, anybody that gambles loses a year. I said this to Mark and GT off the air. I'll go first and then get out of the way. Tom and Terry and Morningstar and those guys have all been very kind to me. But I don't think I'm their friend. I think we're friendly. I don't mean that in a bad way. I just don't want to overestimate or overstate my relationship with them. The only kid I really know on that team, any sort of personal relationship, is Gabe Arnold, and that's really through his dad. I had lunch with Gabe. He came on the podcast last year, did a great job. I was sick to my stomach when I read this last night, and we were texting, and I was completely wrong. I thought for sure these guys, it would not be a punishment because I feel like it's a victimless crime. I feel like what's going on, like with the NCAA with basketball, like the FBI investigated Kansas and they didn't get punished. And I can go through song and dance, and I understand that comparison is the thief of joy. And I understand that right is right and wrong is wrong on an absolute basis. But at the very least, I do not feel like the severity of the punishment matches the severity of the crime. But the way it stands now, it looks like, and some of these names are rumored, but we for sure, whoever bet is going to lose a season of eligibility or year of eligibility. And if this is your last year of eligibility, then your career is essentially your career is over collegiately. I don't know if they can appeal. I'm sure both schools were prepared for the worst case scenario. I'm going to go to you first, Mark. I know you've got thoughts, so the floor is yours.
Yeah, I guess my biggest complaint right now is not whether or not the NCAA did what they thought was right. That is not my complaint. My complaint is how all this happened. And let me just kind of lay it out real quick for you, David and Grant. The Iowa Special Enforcement Bureau in the state of Iowa, it's kind of like they said, it's kind of like the FBI of Iowa. We're Iowa, guys. We don't have that many people that live here, but they're our FBI, okay? They wanted to crack down on underage gambling. That's what their purpose was, because the state of Iowa 2 years ago adopted gambling. We could get on FanDuel, we get on DraftKings, and they had fought it, and finally, because we have casinos in Iowa and the state makes a lot of money, they're not making money off of FanDuel. They're not making money off of, DraftKings. So they didn't want them to invade Iowa, but it finally happened, so on and so forth. So the whole thing was to cut down on underage gambling, which I have no problems with. If you're underage gambling, it's illegal. You shouldn't be doing it. It puts families in financial ruins at times. I have no problem with that. But when you find out that a kid that's 22 years old is gambling, why do you look any further if he's not breaking the law? They did not break the law. Yet they
small interjection. the rumor is Pinero was gambling before he was 21. Okay.
Yes.
But the Iowa guys, the names that are out there, we're not saying it's true or false, like Brands, Casio, or Brands, Assad, etc. Were, if they did it, was GT, go ahead, jump in. Let's say you're going to say something.
No. Like, I was going to, once again, to Mark's point, like a legal law of a normal person. Like, I mean, there's probably institutional rules like that are not necessarily laws, but like you have institutional documentation, like the NCAA, Big Ten, your conference stuff that you would sign, but it's not an actual like state of Iowa prohibited law. So I just want to make sure.
You and Nick Mitchell have team rules that are not laws, but if you break those team rules, you're off the team at Grandview, but it doesn't mean you're going to jail.
Right. Code of conduct for universities. There's code of conduct for the wrestling team. There's all sorts of different levels of laws, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood what Mark was saying.
Yeah.
As supporting his topic. So yeah, continue, Mark.
So anyway, they get into this and they find out that there are underage people gambling in the state of Iowa. And they find out that a lot of them were student athletes in the state of Iowa. So what does this Iowa FBI decide to do? Let's turn everybody in that's a student athlete to the NCAA. It makes no sense whatsoever. If you're not 20, if you're over 21, you should have some, I don't know what I want to say about this, but you should have some restrictions that they can't just give out your information willy-nilly just because they want to hurt you or hurt the universities. These kids were legal to bet on FanDuel. Like Brands.
I think the question is whether
did a big thing early on. This is what I did. I bet $25. They gave me $50 or whatever.
He put in $5. They gave him $200. Okay, that's the way the thing worked. I think
so. Then he started betting on things, and you know what? He probably bet on the Iowa girls basketball game in the semifinals because, heck, we don't get in the semifinals in girls basketball. And this Caitlin Clark has just, changed women's basketball in the country, and she's from Iowa. These kids are proud of them, those people. The same thing.
I think the thing is, it's in let me start with, I completely agree with you, and then I want Grant to be able to jump in. I think, like, if they bet on the NFL, I don't know if they'd still be getting punished. That was unclear, but but even then, like Tristan Wirfs was a lineman for Iowa, and he now plays for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And if you were friends with him, then you could get insider information. I think that's the whole thing. Like, we've all coached and we've all been athletes. And, when you're in the training room, you're there with other athletes and you might just know stuff. I just think in general, and then I want to give it over to GT, like, let's just say that we'll say Nelson Brands, because he put his stuff up on X/Twitter and took it down, but people screen grabbed it. Let's say he bet on women's, we can't say girls basketball, women's basketball. And let's say that he's friends with Caitlin Clark and knew somebody was injured on the other team, or that somebody was coming back on Iowa, whatever the case may be. I think the real question is, does that deserve a full season eligibility loss? So, Grant, you're in the weeds here, like, not at this program, but Iowa and Iowa State are Nike schools, okay? And you're, like we talked off the air, the Grandview Open is this weekend. You're an active college coach. I know there's different rules in NEI and in NCAA, but it's not impossible that you could see a scenario like this happen under a college coach's watch besides these two schools. So we were all texting about this last night, but I want to definitely give you the floor.
Well, I'll speak to the Grandview aspect of it. So, for instance, if any of the athletes that were at certain institutions that were under investigation were then to have gone to a different division, that still follows them.
Okay, I want to make sure I understand that. So if you have a D1 transfer that's at Grandview, and let's just say that hypothetically the NAI doesn't care if you bet on NCAA games, that athlete can't do it because they were at a D1, they were at an NCAA institution. Is that what you're saying?
No.
Okay.
For instance, I'll use a hypothetical person and just call them Adam. So Adam was at Iowa or Iowa State. He transferred to a NAIA program, but during his time at said program, he was betting on whatever it was. And they come to find out that he was betting on stuff while he was at that institution, but then has since transferred out of that institution and gone to another program. He's on their list of the Iowa FBI and was under NCAA regulations at the time. So that case would still follow them to whatever said university. You don't just like, hey, transfer to the NA, but then you still have to again go through the governing body of said division. Or if you're at Division I, you went back to JUCO, or Division II or Division III, does not matter. That case would then follow you no matter what, and then would have an effect on your eligibility if you did all of the things that were in the tiers of what the NCAA had basically wrote out as of yesterday. Like if you bet on your institution or what, all these other things, right?
Well, let's make it more specific. I went to Iowa State 100 years ago. I transfer, let's say I was there while I was 21 years old. I transfer and wrestle for GT and Nick and Grant Henderson, et cetera. But I gambled while I was at Iowa State, which I did. I played a lot of poker, but that's a different conversation. But, and they find out, then it's up to the NAI whether I lose eligibility. Let's just talk about your perception of this as a coach and as a guy that works with world-class athletes, male and female, especially on the USA Wrestling, but also the UWW side. You know, just your gut visceral reaction to all this.
I have two different like series of thought here. Like one, the NCAA wants athletes to participate in sport. And I think and this is also the IOC does this as well, as you can see with like what they're trying to be able to add Russian athletes to be a part of the Olympic Games, even though they're from Russia or Belarus or whatever it may be. The goal is to have athletes participate. I believe that's the mantra or whatever. I can't think of the proper word right now, but that's what they want to have.
Maybe
right.
Mission statement. Yeah. Okay.
I don't think that they really want to take athletes' opportunities away. I don't think that that's their intent all the time. But yes, with some of these rulings, I think they've swung really far. They're like, if you looked at the rule at the very beginning, it was black and white, death penalty, you're done. You'll never be an NCAA athlete again. Then they swing all the way to the other side, like, well, there's going to be no punishments, and everyone's going to be able to just get us, whatever it is, a reduced sentence or whatever it is. Whatever they wanted to say is like, you still get to compete, but you're going to go through some other things that it's not going to allow or hinder your ability to compete for the NCAA. Now they're in the middle, and they're like picking and choosing like what offenses were more egregious than the other ones. And I feel like it's very subjective to each individual athlete's situation. Meaning, all right, for instance, like Cassiope and Assad are done. Seabrook loses a year. Some other guys only lose like 2 to 4 matches. It's like, out of that.
Brands would be done, right?
Well, Brands would be done as well if he didn't have like a medical red shirt or whatever it is that's available for him or something along those lines. Right. If it gets granted. So on specifically the Iowa wrestling roster, you have like whatever it is, 8 athletes that have been subjected to this, basically investigation, and you're going to have 6 to 8 different rulings on each individual athlete. So meaning like Cassiope and Assad done, that's 2 out of the 8 or whatever. And then Brand's probably done, but has, the ability to maybe come back. Seabrook loses a year or whatever. Once again, I'm just using this as generalities. I don't know if that's the actual specific ruling for each one of those guys, but I just feel like they're just kind of making stuff up as they go. And that's just my own personal opinion.
Your Wi-Fi froze.
I don't think that there was any ruling. This now, I don't think that the infractions have been basically set out there for the athletes to really understand what the consequence would have been. They're just kind of making it up. And once again, I believe that where's the investigations in other states. Like this would have not happened in the state of Georgia. Number one football team in the world. They come after the Georgia football team. Nope, not going to happen. You think that this would have survived in Texas? I don't believe so. I don't think that they would have done an underage gambling probe and all of a sudden had Archie Manning, like,
yeah, Alabama,
you know,
California, Caleb Williams. I mean, you can go through, and none of these people are guilty. We're just, but I
Right.
get your point. Yeah,
and that's my point is that like the state of Iowa is like been the guinea pig for the NCAA in this regard. I haven't heard of anything, and once again, I could be ignorant to the fact, but I haven't heard of any other states going through this underage gambling probe situation before.
yeah.
So it's very, as Mark and I, and once again, you've spent a lot of time in Iowa.
Yeah.
It seems very interesting that like Iowa would get this much attention on something that is, once again, in other parts of the country would be probably more of a problem than what is happening currently in Iowa, where they're betting on Iowa women's basketball in the national tournament, or, you know, Iowa football versus Northwestern on a week-to-week basis.
Or the Iowa football under every week. Just to inject a little levity into the conversation.
Just hey, if you guys were betting the under for Iowa football, you could have made millions.
Yeah,
So-
legally. We could have made it legally. So
For sure.
you brought up something, and we have other subjects we have to get to, but one of the things you brought up, and I had written this down, was Iowa versus the other 49 states. So I think what's important, I mean, people's reputations are going to take damage here. And you see it throughout time where people get accused of stuff and then they're not guilty. And it's, you know, the court of public opinion decides ahead of time. Even if these guys did this, guilty seems like a really strong word. The thing that you said, GT, and Mark, you said it in a different way by bringing up the Iowa quote FBI. This isn't being pursued in Missouri, okay, where I live, you know, and I have no reason to think anybody at any college in Missouri is doing anything right or wrong, but it's just not being pursued. And here's a second thing that I think is missed. I don't think the NCAA cares. Okay. They don't care. They're just trying to stay relevant. Like there's a very real possibility that the NCAA will be out of business in 5 to 10 years when these teams pulls themselves away from the NCAA basketball tournament, and these schools just figure out how to do it on their own. I've made this analogy. It's like when a kid's making more money than the parent's telling them what the rules are. They're like, I don't need to live here. You're not paying my rent. You're not paying my food. I'm actually paying you. And so why are you in charge? I think we can put a bow on it and say this. I think, and again, if I'm speaking for you guys incorrectly, we're not happy with the ruling. We don't think that what these guys are being accused of merits a full year of eligibility loss. And I would venture to say that if you interviewed 70 of the other coaches and hooked them up to lie detectors, they'd be like, let these dudes wrestle. A, because most of these coaches and athletes want to wrestle the best. And B, glass houses, right? Like you don't know for sure. There's no way a college coach knows what all 33 of his athletes are doing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And somebody's doing something wrong, because there's no way you just have 33 angels. Like that just, I mean, but there's all different versions of wrong. Like, did you look over to your right and, you know, Mark's smarter than me in math, so did I, you know, get the answer from him on number 7 versus doing something really wrong? So where this affects us is we're going to have to go back and tweak our team projections and rankings and guesses. It feels very trivial after what we're dealing with here, but it is part of what we do. We enjoy doing it. We enjoy people, you know, messaging us saying you got this right or wrong. And, you know, there are wings to be bet. So let's go to, there's no easy segue. Let's go to 285. So we did the rankings. Before all this happened, I had messaged these guys and said, send me your rankings so I can plug them in and then plug in the team rankings. So we all had the first 5 identical. We all had Gable Stevenson first, Wyatt Hendrickson second, Greg Kirkfleet third, Tony Cassiope fourth, Colton Schultz fifth. Mark had Lucas Davison, Younger, Bastida, Feldman 6, 7, 8. I had Davison, Bastida, Elam 6, 7, 8, and Grant had Bastida, Elam, Slavakowski 6, 7, 8. So I think the most interesting thing out of this is we all have Bastida in the top 8. And I will just say this, and if any of you guys want to add to it, I think we feel like he has great movement. He's probably going to wrestle better. Dresser said in his press conference that Bastida really didn't want to cut weight last year, but he did it because Sam Schuyler was on the team. And then like the week after season, he was already up to like 230. You know, if you're on any social media, the guy looks jacked at about 230. You know, he's a Cuban, and typically international wrestlers struggle to get off bottom. The struggle to get off bottom could be worse at a higher weight class, but Mark and I were talking off the air, and sometimes those guys don't move as well and don't create as much leverage. So it could arguably be easier. We do feel like he's got really good foot movement and motion, and the pace of a match at heavyweight is slower than 197. So his cardio might actually be better, especially if he's eating healthily and isn't, if he wants an extra scoop of potatoes or something, he can have it. Is there anything you guys want to add to the Bastida side of this conversation? I'll take that as a no.
Grant? No?
No, once again, I think that at the heavyweight category right now, I think there's a lot of solidified talent and people that are, proven to be really good heavyweights. I think probably why we maybe gravitated towards Younger is that he was a previous All-American at 197, and he's kind of proven to be also a really good talent. And I just think that good wrestling minds can take a look at a very athletic heavyweight, and so I think it's not maybe a knock on the rest of the field, but I think it's just hey, this guy looks like he could be the guy. I think more so than anything.
Yeah, he looks the part. Yeah. And listen, we'll go back and talk about the upsets of this week. We all picked Matt Ramos in the top 3 or 4. I have to go back and look, but he lost this weekend to a high school kid, which we're going to get into. But it doesn't mean because a guy loses a match in November, he's not going to, Buzakis lost some matches. It doesn't mean he's not going to end up being an All-American. But, so it can go both ways on stuff like that. Okay, couple of other things just to talk about. National Signing Day was yesterday. That's always fun to see all the graphics and posters of kids that have committed everywhere. I'm not going to talk about any 1 or 2 kids because that's an entire show. Congratulations to all these young men and women or young ladies that have achieved their goal, got an athletic scholarship, are going to continue their wrestling careers. We all wrestled in college. It was, great experience in our lives, and I think helped us become the people we are. So congratulations to these folks that are committing to the next step, and they have schools that are interested in them. Wrestling teaches so many great lessons, so congratulations to all of them. The Pan Am Games, the results are out there. We did very well overall. We medaled at 3 weights in Greco. I think it's a little difficult to tell if the rest of the countries sent their number ones, which is important because the easiest path for America to qualify their unqualified weights at men's freestyle, men's Greco, and women's freestyle is through the Pan Am Games. You have to take first or second there versus top 3 at last chance, which are bringing in now basically everybody in the world that hasn't made it. There's 13 people that have made it at a weight, and it's everybody else is dumped into one tournament, and you got to take first, second, or third. So that's something to keep an eye on. Jordan Burroughs supposedly weighed 74.4 at some point, but definitely made 76 kilos or less. If you're not a hardcore international person, it's a 2 kilo allowance, which is 4.4 pounds. Wrestled really well, looked explosive. GT, he's clearly going down. He's not going up, which I think was maybe subject to conjecture. I thought he looked pretty good overall. And, there's some funny moments there where a guy tried to call a timeout because he don't want to wrestle anymore against Burroughs. I still feel like, Burroughs is going to have a tough go of it because he's going to have to go through the mini tournament. He's probably not going to be the number 1 seed. Marsteller will be if he goes down as well. And that weight's really good with like Nolf, Keegan O'Toole, David Carr, probably David McFadden. There's a bunch of people at that weight. But overall, pretty encouraging for Burroughs if you're in the Burroughs camp on how he looked, right?
Yeah, I think anytime that you get JB back at 74, I think it's the proper weight for him. I think that he made the best of his situation and becoming a world champ at 79 kilos. But I think the Olympic weight for him is proper weight. And once again, the king is still the king. I mean, JB is still himself. Like, he looked really good over in Kazakhstan. But you got to feel good about the competition at 74. Multiple medals at that weight class, between U23s, juniors, and seniors heading into State College in April. So, yeah, be ready for that because Dake, O'Toole, Carr, Burroughs, Marsteller, Nolf, like, that's a murderer's row of talent.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Like, Mark and I will geek out and talk about the potential matchups, but if you're Burroughs, you're going to have to wrestle whoever the 3 seed is, most likely, which is some version of probably Nolf at this point because he's beaten Keegan. But that makes Keegan and David Carr theoretically the 4-5, unless we're skipping somebody. But he would have to beat Nolf, maybe beat the 7 seed who's good, beat Marsteller, then weigh in, then go 2 out of 3 with Dake. So, I mean, that's, but again, Dake had to go through that path to beat Burroughs to now be the guy. And, our system is set up like you get the benefit of the doubt if you've done it at the world level. And it's proved the results have proven to be very good at the world level, which is what USA Wrestling wants and what we as fans want, is we want to see America winning medals. And so this system has worked very well. So, Mark,
one quick side note, David, I just want to ask, what about Zane Rutherford? Where's he going?
Oh, yeah.
So
that's a great point, is that you still have 70 and 79, respectively, Berger, Rutherford, Pantaleo, Sasso, hypothetically like that, if he makes his way all the way down.
There's a bunch of guys that are really good. Yeah.
That becomes, once again, I think the Olympic weight, Mark, I think to your point is you in that middle category, like if you're not a heavyweight or 57 kilos and you're in those like the 86, 74, 65 category, you're going to have people up and down above you or below you coming to your weight class.
Yep.
Carter Starachi is a guy we haven't even mentioned.
Yeah.
And he's talking about Olympic medals all the time. That might be the 7 seed. That might be Burroughs' quarterfinal match.
It's absurd the amount of depth that we have at freestyle in the United States, including what we're going to be having coming out of the folk style season.
Yeah.
Remember back in 2016 when Jaden Cox basically kind of just made a run, NCAA title, Olympic medal, like all in the span of like 4 months, basically became our guy at freestyle and then made another world team immediately follow.
And medaled at the Olympics. Yeah, like just crazy.
Crazy
so
stuff.
Got his passport in 36 hours. Like, the rules are different for certain people. So yeah, for sure. Joey McKenna beats Yanni 4-3. That's fascinating. That weight is so up in the air. To go to your point, Mark, about Zane Rutherford, I watched David Taylor get interviewed at Flow, and they asked him, and, I think he was smart. He didn't answer. He's like, I don't know. That's his decision. But you're going to start seeing these things. I would think this, if he's going up, you'd probably see him wrestling in tournaments to get acclimated, and if he's going down, you're probably not going to see him because, why would you wrestle, like that's a big weight cut. That's 11 pounds, and it's a bigger percentage of your body weight. And the other thing is Zane Rutherford's in a different position than Jordan Burroughs. He sits in the semis of the Olympic trials, which I probably nerd out about that more than any of the other, all three of us here, but it matters. Like when Vito won the world, he doesn't have to do anything now during the whole college season. Like he's in the semifinals of the tournament because Zane Richards did not medal. So he has an even shorter path, so actually Rutherford's got the same path if he goes down because Nick Lee didn't medal.
Yep.
So the contraction, I guess, is the best word when you contract from 10 weights to 6, and it's really 9 weights to 5 to GT's point, because you don't see anybody at 97's an Olympic weight, so there's no weight between 97 and 125 that people, the 92 guys are not jumping to 125. They're either going to 97 or 86. So it's just those guys are all contract, and the same thing with the women's weights and with the men's Greco weights. So it's fascinating. Let's see. Tyler Ishins transfers from Stanford to North Carolina. He had a good Greco U23s GT. I think he went 2-2. He follows Rob Cole. So that's kind of a low-key move that people may not be following. Let's talk a little bit about this high school kids wrestling in college tournaments. So for people that don't know, Mark coached junior college for a bunch of years. I coached junior college for a bunch of years. And it used to be the criteria for being seated at the NCAA was it didn't matter. The number of D1 matches you had was not a major criteria. So junior colleges could enter these tournaments with Division I schools. And Mark, I think it's a fair sentence. Good junior colleges tried to do that as often as possible for at least 2 reasons. One reason was to get their guys good competition. And number 2, it was the best way to get a guy recruited. Like if the guy from Merrimack or Iowa Central wrestled the guy from Iowa State or Iowa or Northern Iowa really good or beat him, that's the number one way to get recruited versus, the coach seeing how good you are versus other junior college guys, because they don't know if it's a good weight or a bad weight or whatever. And so now that's not the case. So for people that don't know, Marcus Blaze, Bo Bassett, Jax Forrest all entered the Clarion Open. I'm sure some other kids did too, but those were the 3 high-profile cases. Blaze beat Forrest in the quarterfinals in a really fascinating match. He ended up winning by a lot of points, but he was actually losing in the third period. Then Blaze beats Matt Ramos, who was the returning number 1 guy based on being the runner-up last year and beating Spencer Lee in a 1 takedown overtime match.
Great scramble.
And then he loses in the finals. Bo Bassett wins the weight at 33. So I think it's great for the high school kids, right? And it's great for the tournament. Like Clarion Open gets a ton of publicity. I think it stinks if you're a college guy because there's nothing to gain, right? Like if Matt Ramos beats Marcus Blaze, they're like, okay, so what? Marcus Blaze's brother goes to Purdue. So that's a weird situation. He's probably worked out with them. Might know his favorite setup or 2. Maybe Ramos really likes Blaze and doesn't really want to wrestle him, but it's great for the high school kids and it's great for the tournament, but it stinks for the college kids. Now, the weird thing is this, like Matt Ramos dropped in a couple people's national rankings, but it's a match that doesn't count. But it's the coaches' vote, which will come. They're going to have that in the back of their head. So it really puts them, and Mark, you and I did the rankings, and I don't know if we said this last week, the rankings are a thankless job. The people that are doing them with these other organizations, I almost got Mark divorced every Sunday night because I would take too much of his time, but it's a really hard job if you want to do it right. But what are your thoughts on whether high school guys should be, I guess high school guys and girls should be allowed to wrestle in these tournaments?
I don't have a problem with them competing in it. If they want to do that, more power to them. Like we've talked about in the past, is that our youth here in the United States has improved so much because of these clubs, and you're seeing the rewards from that being coached by really quality coaches, that they're very competitive right now with the college kids. And I think you're only probably going to see this, David, at the lower weight classes. I don't think you're going to see this at, say, 174, 165. There's a maturity level that's different when you're cutting weight down to 125 compared to if you're at 174. I don't see somebody like Penn State's 174 pounder losing to a high school kid. I mean,
well, that's a different comparison too, because like let's say Parker Keckheisen, okay? Like compare Keckheisen to Matt Ramos, their resumes are more similar than a guy who can be a 4-time national champion. But your point about the physical maturity is certainly valid, right?
Yeah. So I don't have a problem with it. And these college kids, they're just trying to get good matches in. And that's why they're going to these tournaments. They're trying to get prepared for the season. So I'm sure Ramos is going to take, things that happened here and is going to learn from it. I mean, this happened years and years ago, David. Back when I was even in high school, we had a kid named Jeff Kerber from Iowa.
Yeah, I know him.
He wrestled in the Midlands as a high school senior. So it's not like it's never happened before.
Gary Colott wrestled in the Midlands and did really well. Yeah, I mean, there's guys that have done it, but again, it's just interesting. GT, anything here before we move on?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with high school kids competing in college opens. I mean, once again, I don't really have they can do it in freestyle. Like if you want to run into the senior open and you're, a junior age category person, you can definitely do it. Yeah, I don't have a problem with it whatsoever. Now, whether or not the loss counts, I think some of that stuff is ridiculousness. Once again, that's just my own opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, as a coach of the NAI, like, once again, if I wrestle an NCAA guy, it doesn't count. They don't get any benefit out of wrestling us either, because their RPI doesn't affect losses from NAI people or high school kids or whatever. So I just think that, like, hey, if you want to wrestle, go ahead and wrestle. Like, you shouldn't be scared of competition. If they want to be able to go out to college open, and once again, those kids have to know that, like, they're ready for that action. Not all high school kids should go to college opens.
Yeah.
Just so we're all clear, I would say that if you're a really good high school wrestler and you feel like, hey, I should probably go to a college open, and then all of a sudden you're not ready for that action, I think that there's levels to that game that you need to make sure that kids don't go out there and get hurt.
No, for sure. We're talking about the 1%ers. And I mean, Marcus Blaze, Jax Forrest are both world medalists, and Bo Bassett's, the number one guy in the country at 132. So, like, I mean, it's not like some guy is a 2-time state champ and never done anything nationally, and it's like, I'm going to try to do it. I mean, you can, but like you said, there's a very good chance you could get hurt. All right, so if you're watching, I've pulled up fantasygrade.com. Shout out Christian Thompson. Rankings are up. And he's now got Intermat, Flow, Win, Open Mat, and Amateur Wrestling News in here. So it's very, very thorough. We're not going to hit on a bunch of this stuff. We just kind of hit the highlights. 125, no change in the top 10 or 11. Braxton Brown took a loss. Brandon Kaler took 2 losses. Braden Palmer 1, so he moves into the rankings. 133. They added some guys here. So Teskey moves up. Klebo moves up. Buzakis took 2 losses. He was on our radar as an All-American, so that's interesting. Iowa State has some interesting things here with Frost or Grice, and whether or not Echemendia will go 41 or 49. He won that wrestle off, which we'll get to here in a minute. At 41, just so people know, Alvarez is not going to wrestle for Oklahoma State till January, so Jamison is going to wrestle there at least the first semester. Heard from a pretty reliable source that Jamison won the wrestle off, so he would be starting at least initially anyway. Top 10, no changes really to speak of. Sometimes these green moves are if somebody just added them on their rankings or we added a ranking source. But, unless somebody dropped, it's basically that. Really no changes at 49. So if you see here, Swiderski's at 17 and Etchemendy is at 19. And so, they're around that. They got to figure out who's going to do what there. 57. Again, not Brock Mahler moves up. So we talked about this too with the team rankings. Like, I don't know that we would pick Mahler to be in the same spot at 57 as 49. And even if we did, that bumps the guys below him at 49 up a slot and adds somebody into the 8th place spot, which is worth 5.5 points. So Vinny Zerban should be where he's at, if not higher. He was around a 12 guy last year as the 33 seed. And shout out to him. He's from my neck of the woods where I got a chance to coach him. Nothing really at all at 150 or 165, 74. So Nelson Brands is ranked 5th. As you can see, 2 of the sources had him ranked, 3 didn't. So what that really means is like a Cade DeVos would go, or DeVos, however you say it, would go from 9 to 8. And that's a pretty significant upgrade in the team points, projections. And I also felt like Brands was sort of at the top of tier 2 or maybe his own tier 2, where Starachi, Foca, Lewis, Griffith, maybe Starachi's tier 1, Foca, Lewis, Griffith tier 2. I felt like Brands is tier 3 on his own, and then Mako and those guys are part of tier 4. 84, not a lot of changes. Assad was ranked 10th. That's worth 2 points in the ranking, so he'll end up falling out if what we're hearing is correct. 197, nothing significant in the top, really 20, and 285. So there was an article that came out that said Gable is enrolled in Minnesota. So when we were doing our picks, it feels like a pretty safe bet that he's going to wrestle. I think Dayton Pitzer is someone for guys to look out for. He wrestled in those 5 meets last year, and they saved his red shirt because he was kind of small. I got to do the UVA pit duel and talk to Coach Gavin, and they were sitting him, not because they didn't think he'd be good, but they wanted him a chance to be full-blown chance to be an All-American. They got him bigger. So Pitzer's another guy like Bastida guys that has little guy skills that could be very good. He had a really good high school career. He's like 140 something and 3 in Pennsylvania, which is, there's no way to do that and not be good, especially when you're a big guy. You can't be ducking people. So if we go to the team scores, so what's really interesting here is, I don't know why it's sorted in this order, but Iowa should be second. So they had 71.5 points, but if you pull out a couple of these guys, it's going to then be Missouri, Virginia Tech, Cornell, Nebraska, Michigan, Arizona State, NC State are kind of all in a tier between 56 and 66. And some of those teams will get more points, like the most obvious one where there's a ton of guys that are ranked on nationally ranked teams, like is 285, where like Lucas Davison would get a bump, Colton Schultz would get a bump, Owen Trefan would get a bump if Cassiope is indeed out of the rankings. So your guys' thoughts, just, I guess, let me go to what we picked. So when we did our team scores projected, this was interesting to me. Mark's top, we'll say top 10, Penn State, Iowa, Cornell, Iowa State, Michigan, Nebraska, Arizona State, VTech, Mizzou, Minnesota. GT's got Penn State, Iowa, Nebraska 3rd, Cornell 4th, VTech 5th, Arizona State 6th, Iowa State 7, Missouri 8, Oklahoma State 9, Michigan 10. Just for reference, Mark's got Oklahoma State at 12. I've got Penn State, Iowa, Cornell, VTech, ASU, Mizzou, Iowa State, NC State. I think I have NC State the highest of the 3 of us. Michigan, Nebraska, and I have Oklahoma State at 11. And if you took the average, it was Penn State, Iowa, Cornell, VTech, ASU, Iowa State, Nebraska, Missouri, Michigan, Oklahoma State, with NC State and Minnesota all within like a point or 2 of Oklahoma State. But there were pretty clear tiers. Penn State was 40 points ahead of Iowa, and Iowa was 30 points ahead of Cornell. Cornell was 10 points ahead of VTech, and then VTech down to Michigan was basically like a 10-point spread between like 3 through 9. But Iowa is going to fall back, like for sure, into that 3 through 9 group, because not only are they going to lose points, but these other teams are going to gain points. So I think the race for second, third, fourth becomes hugely fascinating now. We're gonna have to figure out how to redo some of our picks, because I think it's fair for us to all get a mulligan, on certain weight classes. It's not like we saw some results and some guy won a bunch of, like, we're not going to change our Matt Ramos pick as an example, or Bouzakis, but I think we're allowed to pull some guys out and move Mueller, and we'll figure out a way to do that next week and see where we stand. But thoughts on that before we jump into a few last things here?
I think it's interesting because there's so many good teams between now 2 and 10. It's going to be hard to pick who finishes that second place with all these guys not being able to wrestle at Iowa. I don't think they're a favorite now to be in the top 2. I mean, that could still change, obviously, with transfers coming in maybe at the semester.
If they had Ferrari, then for sure.
Yeah,
like, that's a top 3 guy, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, right now, though, it's interesting because I don't remember the last time one school was 65, 70 points better than all the other schools. And that's kind of what we're getting with Penn State. And then it's everybody else. And you can throw a dart to figure out who's going to be the next 2 or 3 schools.
Well, GT, this is the text I sent last night. I said I'd set the Iowa over-under without Ferrari at 56.5. And I put Ayala at 10, Woods at 23, Franek at 10, Caliendo at 8, and 5.5 for the rest of the team. That might be a little low. Like Voinovich is certainly a guy that could place. There's so much ambiguity now at 97, heavy, 84, 74. I mean, basically their last 4 weights. And I don't know about Kennedy, where, if he comes back in, does Gabe Arnold start right away? Does Kobe Franklin go? Does Zach Glazier go? Like, who goes? But if you obviously add a Ferrari in there, and I think we all picked him second or third, and my number's close, then they bump to like 70, which would, be ballpark enough for them to get second again. It also makes this Iowa State duel really fascinating now, right?
It's going to be nuts. It's going to be absolutely nuts.
Well, imagine the commentary that ESPN will be having in regards to the Iowa gambling situation on television.
It's terrible, right? I mean, that part's bad.
I mean, because if you would have had both rosters fully healthy with everything that they have, I mean, that's an epic duel in general. But imagine how much more firepower you would have had with, 2 other All-Americans and, a guy that could have been ranked number 1 in the nation last year. And it's like, you got all these different things. Like, yeah. But now that duel gets super weird.
We talked about it. It feels like each team's favored at 3 or 4 weights, and there's 3 or 4 toss-ups. I am coming up for that, so I'm excited. Sunday after Thanksgiving. It's also awesome that it's the first duel that's going to be on ESPN, the big ESPN Live. It does sort of stink that the black eye of the gambling thing, because they have to talk about it, right? If you're any sort of responsible journalist, you have to talk about it. And, if nothing else, to say, well, Iowa would have had these guys in the lineup. And, Pinheiro, as an example, is a guy that could potentially have been in this lineup. So,
perfect spot, David. Just to let you know, I'm going to say it out loud. It could be a perfect spot to do a podcast on that day up at Iowa State. It's a big duel.
Yeah, we would. I think the duel's in the afternoon, so we'd have to do it in the morning. And I'm staying in Des Moines, so we'd have to get up early. But I'm here for it if you guys want to do it. I ain't scared of it. You guys know that. So just so people can keep an eye out on the schedule this weekend. I don't want to short people, but kind of the highlights are Ohio State, Virginia Tech tomorrow, Friday night. The Michigan State Open, which has CMU, Michigan State, NIU, Northwestern, Oklahoma, Wisconsin. The Grandview Open, which has Northern Iowa. The Mizzou Invite, which I'll be on the mic for, Cal Poly, Lindenwood, Little Rock, Maryland, and Missouri. That's a cool meet. They let teams bring multiple athletes. Arizona State wrestles Lockhaven. I don't know if we'll see Figueroa and Noto, but that'd be a cool one to see. This is all at Journeyman, and Journeyman does duels day 1 and individual day 2. So the teams that are Journeyman are Arizona State, West Point, Bloomsburg, Buffalo, Cornell, Franklin and Marshall, Harvard, Hofstra, Lehigh, Long Island University, Lockhaven, NC State, Penn State, Purdue, and Sacred Heart. And so those are sort of the highlights of the schedule for this week. Shout out to Navy. They beat Illinois in a duel. And a couple other shout outs real quick. Again, like thank you to Flo and Mizzou for letting us be on the air. Also, shout out to North Point High School and Chris Purcell. Got invited out to their trivia night. Got to hang out with Nick Perler. He and I grew up together. He's got an awesome family. Got to visit with his daughter and wife, and couldn't have been nicer. They did have a category that was all math, and Nick's wife is a math teacher, and I'm a finance guy, so we did go 8 for 8 in that category. So if all the questions could have been math, we would have won, but they were not. So I think we have time, guys, to at least visit this Ohio State, Penn State event, duels this weekend. So I'm sorry, Ohio State, Virginia Tech. I'm waiting for this website here to refresh, hopefully. If not, I'm going to close out of it and just restart it.
So is there a chance this weekend, David, we could see Penn State and Cornell wrestle?
No.
They will not wrestle?
No, they're not on each other's dual schedule.
Okay.
So the way that works is within that meet, they already know who they're going to wrestle.
Okay.
So now and then they do the individual things. And GT, I think we've talked about this. They do it kind of like who are the A guys, B guys, et cetera, kind of thing. So, like theoretically, like a Noto and Biggs would be in there. Like we haven't seen Ja'Cory Teamer wrestle in a while, so I'm excited to see that. I don't think Colton Schultz or Clebo will wrestle. I think they're giving those guys rest. I mean, that would be my expectation there. So, when you come off work, and, Schultz came off pans too, U23s and pans. So he'd probably definitely need some R&R. So let me see if we can do this. All right. So I love this website. This is so cool because if you plug in 2 teams, they literally just line everything up. So just so people know, I have Ohio State on the left, Virginia Tech on the right, if you're not looking. So it's an unranked wrestler for Ohio State versus Ventresca, Uzakis versus Latona, Mendez versus, I would guess, Tom Crook or somebody of that nature. D'Amelio, Caleb Henson's a 5-star match. Patty Gallagher, Bryce Andonian, super interesting. A really important match is Bryce Hepner, number 20, versus Connor Brady, number 22. Another big match, Carson Karchla against Mekhi Lewis. At 84, we don't know if we're going to see Gavin Hoffman or Seth Shoemate against Sam Fisher. 97, we don't know if we're going to see Hoffman or Luke Geog against Andy Smith. And then Feldman, who is ranked below Hunter Katka. So I think sort of the obvious sentences here is Mendez would be favored. Eddie Ventresca would be favored. Bryce Andonian would be favored. Mekhi would be favored. But just a ton of really, really salty, good matchups. So, Mark, you're really good at this. If you picked, do you have it 5-5? Do you have it 6-4 one way or the other? How would you do this?
Well, that's a good question, David. I'm not sure how I would do this. I think Karchla can beat Lewis. He's beaten him in freestyle. I think he's a little better on his feet. So I would probably want to – but Karchla kind of got banged up at the tournament at the Clarion, tweaked his knee a little bit, so we may not see him at all. Gallagher and Andonian, they both wrestled at the same high school in Ohio, so they were teammates. So that's going to be an interesting match. D'Amelio, Henson, I think Henson's a little bit better, but D'Amelio looks good at 149. I think the weight cut going down to 41 was probably hard on him. So I'm going to say 5-5, David, right now.
GT, all three of us picked Buzakis. I think we're still high on him. And Latona lost last weekend too. He lost to Gabe Wisenhunt. So both these guys are coming off losses, which in a weird way is good for this duel if you're a coach, because you don't have to go, hey man, wake up, don't take anybody lightly. I mean, you coach, like the easiest way to get a guy focused is after a loss, not after a win. Let me ask you this. The three matches I think that are kind of must watch are Buzakis, assuming everybody's healthy, Buzakis, Latona, Henson, D'Amelio, and Karchel and Mackay. And then the fourth one I think is Gallagher, Andonian. Like, of those matches, do you have you have one of those you feel really strong about? Anything you're really looking forward to? Is there technique wise, you think one guy is going to be able to do something against another guy? What are your thoughts on those banger matches in particular?
Well, I think probably Mackay and Karchla are probably one of the ones that I would probably gravitate to more. Just with Karchla coming up a weight class, Mackay being kind of a journeyman at that weight class, and injury versus injury, make sure that both those guys are healthy and they basically put it out there and scrap hard. I think, to your point, Buzakis and Latona coming both off of losses, or losses that were kind of unconventional losses for them. I think both of those guys it'll be fireworks there. And I think just as far as rankings are concerned, looking at some of those swing matches, up at 84, 97 heavy.
Yeah.
Once again, evenly matched, could be just firework matches between those guys. Really excited to see what Nick Feldman does. Very highly touted recruit. So very excited to see him in person against, anybody really. Just want to make sure that once again, if he's the truth, let's see it. So
yeah.
Once again, really cool duel. I mean, once again, I also have Caleb Henson making the finals. So I think that and D'Amelio is a freaking great matchup. So
Henson beat Sammy Sasso in this meet last year, I believe. To announce himself very early on. If you just kind of look at the rankings, Virginia Tech wins 25, Virginia Tech wins 33, Ohio State wins 41, Virginia Tech wins 49, Virginia Tech wins 57. 65 is a complete toss-up. Virginia Tech wins 74. And then if they wrestle Hoffman, Ohio State wins 84. 97 is a complete toss-up. And I actually think if people were betting, Feldman would probably be the favorite. So it's VTech feels like they have a few more, but again, that's Henson beating D'Amelio as counting that as a win, and Latona beating Buzakis and counting that as a win, and Mackay beating Karchel and counting that as a win. And those could all go the other way. So, I mean, this duel could get weird. It could be 7-3, 8-2, one team or the other. But it could be where one team wins a bunch of one or 2 point matches. I think we'll see more 2 point matches now instead of 1 point matches because of the 3 point takedown, but a 1 takedown match. But it generally happens these duels end up going 5-5, where, Mark's team gets a couple and Grant's team get a couple, and they both think they could have got the other ones, but they didn't. And that's just kind of how it works out. So that's a great duel to watch. GT, good luck to your guys running and wrestling in the Grandview Open. I will be on the mic for Flo on Saturday for the Missouri Invite. Marco, what's the stuff you're going to be watching the most this weekend?
I don't know yet. I really don't know. I might run over and watch Grandview wrestle in the Open. Iowa Central's going to be there. Be nice to see Grant. I got a pair of wrestling shoes I need to get back to him, so see what happens.
Yeah. Peyton Hall took a loss this weekend too.
Surprising. So, I have him ranked in the top 8 on my list. That surprised me. So.
It did. But again, it's November and it's barely November. So, all right. So for Mark and Grant, I'm David. Thank you guys for watching and listening. We'll see y'all next week.